In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast, where leaders keep it real. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is Simon Mainwaring. We're back again. Simon, thanks for being here again.
Good to see you, Kevin. A month like that, gone.
It's gone. It's quick. And today is the 21st of September, a day we're all forced to remember. What were you doing on 1978, September 21st, when Earth, Wind, and Fire came out with that song?
I think I was probably learning how to ride a skateboard with the world's largest motorcycle helmet on my head because my mother didn't want me to hurt myself. So I was probably basically wiping out any appeal that I had to young ladies at that age simply by trying to ride a skateboard with a motorcycle helmet. True confession.
Smart mother. Now wearing protection is very important because we want.
Is that that's the public safety message for today? That's beautiful.
Obviously the helmet didn't work because you're kind of a little messed up in the head, but
absolutely
all we can do is try sometimes, I guess.
Right. And 1978. That seems like the 80s. I know the 80s are coming back around. A lot of marketing and advertising and branding out there. You see the 80s coming back. And I'm realizing it's 40 years ago. And when your heyday was 40 years ago, you start to worry that time is not what it used to be. It seems to be flying past. And even more so in this COVID time, it seems so strange.
Well, see, Simon, I think you're nice and fresh. And that's a topic I want to get into today, is multi-generational leadership. What can people coming up in the workforce learn from those above them? What can those above them learn from those coming up in the workforce? I think it's an interesting topic. A few companies are inviting young members on their board due to recent events like Greta or Malala, things like that are having a big impact because a lot of companies think it's all about, preserving the next generation, leaving a legacy. What are your thoughts right now in this day and age about incorporating young leaders in boardrooms and in decisions?
I think it's critical for two reasons. One, the best qualified leaders for the future are those, in some sense, whose lives are going to be most directly impacted by that future. And these young people have come, into this world and to find a house on fire in many degrees. And they have no kind of legacy thinking or behavior holding them back. The existing conditions that they're solving for are acute and they're urgent. And so they have an immediacy and a scale of response that a lot of older folks don't have. That said, those who are more senior than them, that have had full careers up to this date, do have a lot of experience that they can benefit from, because the business of business is something you need to understand. It's one thing to have the intent. It's another to execute against that in a way that's going to go to scale. And so I do think they need to meet in the middle. And to your point about having them on boards, I think boards have huge diversity issues outright. And I think there's very few boards that really have a decent representation of youth. I think that'd be a way to lurch things forward.
What are some other ways? Maybe what is the mindset a leader has to have? I had someone that I was speaking with just off the air, and he was saying, I am so inspired by your generation. And I think it's, up to you guys to solve the problems of today's day and age. And I took a step back. It's like, we need to work together on this. This is an everybody game. What are your thoughts on how a business leader can maybe change the mindset of working and helping the next generation?
Well, I think one of the most powerful shifts we've seen is whether you look back at, Greta around Climate Week and so many beyond that around Black Lives Matter and gun control and so on, you see these incredibly self-possessed young people who aren't waiting for anyone else to have a solution. And they're certainly not looking to brands or corporations to solve things for them. They are saying, listen, if I got $5,000 and a clipboard and a pen, I'm off to drive some change. So I'm very, very inspired by just how they've all given themselves agency to change things. At the same time, this whole mindset that a leader is somehow this solitary figure, arguably at the top, is so misguided. One of the things I'm very passionate about at WeFirst, hence the name, is how we actually lead together. Because think about it. No amount of young, positive, well-intended social enterprises are going to solve for these issues if the big companies out there are still going about business as usual and hurting the environment and doing what they've always done. Or no amount of enlightened CEOs up at Davos talking about how they want to change the world is going to make any difference if consumers are still going about things the way they've always done and buying products and packaging and so on that's hurting the planet. until we realize we all are in this together and we all have to solve for it together, we're never going to kind of meet the challenges we face with equal force. And so I love the self-possession of younger demographics and, people of color and women and all of these fantastic kind of movements that are long overdue. But at the same time, we've got to couple that with the fact is we're all on the hook. If we all want to benefit from the results of all of this work, then we all have to assume the responsibilities to get there.
Now, your book talks about, let me just read the title off right here, how brands and consumers can use social media to build a better world. One of the first examples you use in this book is about Haiti, how social media can drive donations to certain areas where you can see victims through geolocation and geotagging, things like that may have not have been there in a pre-social media world. With a younger generation growing up on social media, when you talk about what you ate in the morning for breakfast on Twitter, and in that day and age, what type of impact do you think this is going to have long-term on these situations? And how can social media be used in a proactive way versus more destruction?
I think social media is a bit of a double-edged sword right now. You've got films out there like The Social Dilemma, which a lot of people are responding to. And, even my daughters, I've got a 21 and an 18-year-old daughter, and, they always say the phone eats first. Like when you sit down to the table or you go out, they take a photo of what the hell they're eating in the first place. And I'm like, who is that for? And if it is for them, why do they care now or ever? But I think social media is in a very difficult place. There's a lot of dialogue around how it's been sort of hijacked in service of data mining, invasions of privacy, polarizing issues, including politics and so on and so on and so on. And then you hear, the various stories around TikTok and all these other things that, are really sort of challenging in terms of privacy. I would say that, the reason I wrote that book and the, hopeful ambition I had in writing the book was that it gave us a chance to reweave the social fabric independent of time and geography. I can talk to someone in China in real time and so on and so on. And what it did was it broke this false separation between leaders and institutions with consumers or citizens. Like, before social media, you could find out a certain amount on the web and so on, but you really couldn't enact change. You couldn't self-mobilize. You couldn't scale impact on your own right. And I think that promise is still true of social media, and the issues we're solving for are becoming even more serious, which gives you even more cause to do it. At the same time, I feel like our attention is being atomized at a time when the world is falling apart. Mm-hmm. We are sitting there going, oh my God, a text came in. Oh my God, did you see that TikTok? And oh my God, I got to post this food. And then see that cat video on Facebook. Oh my God, I got emails to answer. And one of the most powerful things any of us can do is recognize the role that social media can play, but step back and look at the world clear-eyed and go, what do we need to do to make a difference for ourselves as well as everybody else?
What is media's role in this whole thing? A lot of people right now have these knee-jerk reactions, me included. I'll see a headliner on Twitter. I'll immediately want to retweet it, talk about it, and tell the world about it until I do actual research behind this. That's the game of media. Who can write the best headline instead of doing actual research, instead of taking time and reading a big book like this, right?
Yeah.
What do you have to say about media's responsibility in this in terms of factual information and getting the right information out there?
I think there's still a lot of great journalism and resources to be had. The social media today is like skimming a rock across the lake. You just touch down on topics for a second and keep moving, skimming across, ignoring the fact that the lake is 200 feet deep. And that robs us of the opportunity to have informed opinions, in which case we're all running around duking it out and amplifying ill-informed or under-informed opinions. And that's just compounding the problem. And this is what I mean by our attention is being atomized. We're being trained to be distracted in ever more sophisticated ways. So the distraction is becoming sophisticated. Meanwhile, some very nefarious things are going on behind the scenes, depending on what you think about the world or your politics or anything else. And a lot of things, as a function of all of our efforts, are falling apart. And so I think media more broadly is wrestling with the fact that it's a freemium model now. And so they've got to generate advertising sales to even stay in business in some way. but at the same time, they want to discharge their original duty, which is to kind of provide information with integrity and communicate what is the objective truth, if there is such a thing. And now we see this tussle going between fake news and, and arguably, researched information. And the great fear I have about this, Kevin, is that if this goes on long enough, people won't believe anything. Like, there will be no compass for how we orientate our thoughts and our actions in our lives. But rather, it'll just be a churn. It'll be like this fire hose of misinformation, in which case that can be very disorientating for people. You won't know which way to turn. You won't have solid ground under your feet. And that makes it hard to not only have a point of view, but then to organize around those points of view and solve for these issues.
It's really scary. And do you think that comes from data being misconstrued? And just association with a person. For instance, if you watch Fox, you're not going to believe in CNN. You watch CNN, you're not going to believe a Fox data research, something like that. Where do you think that comes from, and how do you avoid providing wrong or misconstruing data?
I think, media more broadly, which is, a very general term, but especially social media, is not an exercise in content. It's a manipulation of human psychology. I mean, a lot of the Facebook engineers, and there was a recent New York Times editorial, and you see it in this film, The Social Dilemma. I think in a lot of cases, we are the guinea pigs in these massive, psychological experiments that are going on. And they will, to what end? They could manipulate you to think a certain way on a certain issue, to vote for a certain party, to buy a certain product, to take up arms, or to go to sleep, and so, if information was to some degree impartial, now that it's sort of, fluid, shall we say, and it's been hijacked, what do we do? What do we do in terms of finding solid ground for ourselves? So I don't know whether humanity will course correct. I don't know whether there'll reach a point of intolerance where people either step away from their phones, step away from social media. You've seen them step away from certain platforms which don't suit them, like Facebook. Younger people use it less, and so on and so on. But as to whether our sense of self-awareness and self-possession can override our addiction, our nurtured addiction to these channels, it's hard to say.
I had someone tell me the other day that data is now more valuable than big oil. Yeah. And I've had blockchain guests come on the show and say, you should be paid for your data. What are your thoughts on consumers getting money for the data that they provide to big companies that use it maybe unethically?
Well, I think there's 2 points of view. One is that ship has already sailed, so stop being naive and you might as well get paid for it. Every television, every phone we have is watching and listening to us and mining the information with AI. It's already done. In fact, it used to be that the real world would dictate our virtual lives. We'd go out, we'd see a movie, we'd see friends, and then we might go and look online and find a hotel to go on holiday to in Hawaii. Now, our real lives are data points for the virtual world, because even before we want to go to Hawaii, we've got ads in our stream because they've seen that we're looking at photos of Hawaii or someone else's holiday. So we've been productized. We are the product. We are just fleshware whose role is to generate data points that can be then leveraged to whatever end those in control of that data want to achieve. And so, this whole idea of data farms isn't so inaptly named. I mean, they are literally farming our data, and by extension, farming us. We are the industrial product that, is being taken to market with advertisers and others. So it's a very difficult time to navigate, and it can be a little bit disheartening. You can sit there and go, wow, what are we going to do?
Who knows? Let's keep talking about it, though. Maybe we'll come to a conclusion.
Yeah, right. We'll solve it right here and now.
Exactly. So you said addiction. You said this art of consumption. It's right in our hands. What are some brands that stick out to you that have incorporated a digital experience into their products, where they can have their consumers digest information in a different way, where they can take photos with their product and post it online for free and give this company more brand awareness? Are there any examples that stick out to you of companies incorporating a digital experience like this?
Absolutely. And I think it doesn't turn on the digital or social experience outright. It turns on what would motivate somebody to share or to align with a brand and share content or point to a product on the strength of that point of view. So, for example, when Patagonia said when the access to public lands was an issue and mining rights were being opened up by the Trump administration to Bears Ears, this public lands, they took it upon themselves to push back and protest that. But in the same short order, they built a platform called ActionWorks, which married regular citizens with non-profits that were advocating for protection of public lands. And so here you have a brand, leveraging all its might to make a higher order commitment to something larger than itself, in that case, public lands, in which case people share it and so on, and they want to. I'll give you an example. Another example, like last week. So Patagonia released a line of clothing where on the back of the label, it says, "Vote the assholes out," pardon the French. And that was shared all across social media simply because it was the tone was obviously engaging, shall we say, economical in a choice of language, but also, there's a little sensationalism to that. There's something that's very strident about that point of view. Like, when was the last time you went and took a photo of a label and the clothing that you have and shared it with all your friends? I mean, that's an unusual behavior. So all of that is to say, the reason purpose is so important to brands right now is when they show a commitment to something larger than themselves, whether it's universal belonging with Airbnb or responsible economy with Patagonia or whatever it might be, that's when you align around those shared values with consumers, with citizens. They engage, they share that content, they advocate and amplify it, and you're off to the races. And that's how you can build a movement as a brand.
I had the director of philosophy on my show from Patagonia, and I asked him, can every company be a certified B Corporation? Can every company integrate sustainability and movements like the ones you just mentioned with the back of the tags on their labels? And the answer was actually, if it's core to their business model, if it's something that is right for them. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is the only thing worse than not being purposeful as a company at a time when we've got so many crises that we're solving for is to be disingenuous about it. If you want to communicate a purpose or go to market with an impact message of some sort, but it's not core to the business, it's not authentic, it's not aligned, it's not what you're set up to actually execute on successfully, then for you run the risk of being accused of cause washing, greenwashing, purpose washing. For everyone else, you're not going to solve for any issue because your business isn't structured or set up or committed in a way to actually make that possible. In which case, everybody's wasting their time, and you're the worst type of cynic in a sense, because you're taking something which is so potentially impactful and co-opting it disingenuously. I mean, look at what happened with VW and the diesel emission scandal, where they wanted to, they manipulated the software to meet or exceed EPA emissions standards. Or look at, Wells Fargo, when, the idea of actually closing and opening new account, or closing new business and opening new accounts was so pathologically driven internally that all of those fake accounts were, added up, all under the guise of really serving customers better. So these are extreme examples, but when you do it disingenuously, the blowback, the backfire, the backlash is enormous, exponential.
Let's talk about a few industries right now, or maybe it's just one industry, education, that hasn't really come up to speed yet, I guess. You just were mentioning how, let's say, digital natives or millennials or anyone right now are obtaining information, digesting this information, understanding it, yet we're still teaching through a textbook in today's day and age. What are you currently doing with education, not reform, but education and professors at Harvard? And where do you see as a futurist the future of education going?
Yeah, we're lucky to be partnering with Harvard Business School Association of Boston to do a series of webinars over the next 12 months. The first one is actually on this Thursday, the 24th, I believe. And it's all around brands with a purpose. And what we're doing in that webinar is we're actually getting the head of strategy from VF Corporation that owns brands like Timberland, North Face, and Vans, and then the head of sustainability from Procter & Gamble, one of the largest CPGs in the world, and also the head of the developer ecosystem at IBM, who is leading this Call for Code, which is a big competition to solve for climate and COVID-19. And really, the theme is self-disruption, those large global enterprises that are disrupting themselves and their industries. And so, from an education point of view, what we're trying to do at WeFirst, my company, is to get as much out there as we can. We have my podcast, Lead with We. We're doing these webinars. I write a column in Forbes, called Purpose at Work. And you've got to really embrace this idea that you're a media company. And we've gone from the why of things, in a sense of why should we be doing things differently, to the how, because these issues we're solving for are so acute. So to answer your question, rethink of yourself, reframe yourself, no matter what you do, what business you're in, as to whatever degree you can, a media company, and deliver it in these various forms, these different formats, podcasts, blogs, webinars, and so on. And you have to show up and have a voice, A, to cut through the clutter, but B, if you want to drive earned media and build your business and awareness of your brand, that earned media is found at the edges of conversations. It's not in the middle of the fairway, you're being safe, saying, hey, everything should be fine and this and that, and we can balance. You have to have a point of view, and you have to be clear about what you want to solve for. And then you drive those conversations. And yes, it will polarize people, but it will also deepen the loyalty of those who align with you. And it'll also allow you to drive earned media and be seen as a leader who is actually leading, in the sense that you're giving people someone to follow. And that's when you can really unlock value through the education you're providing.
So is that where you would suggest business owners start? And how does a business owner transition to become a purpose-driven, value-oriented company?
Well, back to the Patagonia comment about, it needs to be true to your core business, is you've really got to recognize that every business exists for a reason. No one woke up in the morning and just said, I'm going to go and make whatever to make as much as I can, and that's going to be enough. I mean, there was some need that they wanted to answer. There's some interest they had in some category. There was some problem they wanted to solve for. You've got to articulate what that is, distill it down into the purpose of the organization, and then position your company, its products and services, as social proof of how you're executing against that higher order purpose. So where you start is working out what that purpose is as an organization. And, we have a methodology through which we do that for companies large and small. But the power of it is, when you do, you can lead a movement in service of that purpose, in which all stakeholders are building your business with you. Your suppliers, your employees, your customers, consumers, partners, everyone's out there going, wow, I think this is awesome what you're doing. It aligns with who I am. I'm not only going to buy your product because it has that badge value built into it, I'm going to share your stuff. I'm going to talk about it to others. And when I go online, here's where every business lives or die. Every business, after 25 years in marketing all around the world and working on Nike and running Motorola for Ogilvy, here's what it all is. When you go to your computer and someone has a choice of putting in training shoes or sneakers, I don't know, what do we call them in America? Is it trainers or sneakers?
Yeah, training shoes.
Trainers. You have the choice of putting in trainers or Nike, or trainers and Adidas, or trainers and Asics. Your business will live or die on the strength of whether it's in the consideration set top of mind when someone goes down to order a product. Are you going to get lost in the category, or are they going to consciously choose you because the way that you show up in the world?
See, I think that's the game right now for any purpose-driven company. How do you create a comparable? Can you bring your price down to an economically, can you bring it down to an economical price where it's either the same or just above, where a consumer is going to look at that and say, okay, $10 for this Nike shoe, $10 for this Adidas shoe. This one's made from recycled waste. This one was made in, factories in China that have horrible labor laws. What shoe are you going to pick if it fits and wears the same? I heard that from another example, another business owner who was creating sustainable homes. If I can create a sustainable home that's going to pay off and make you more money in the long run, are you going to pick this home right now at a higher cost, or go with another one? What type of decisions are you going to make? So creating comparables in the marketplace, if you can make a product at scale and bring down the cost where you can compete with another company in today's day and age, I think that company is going to win 10 out of 10 times.
Absolutely. And these economies of scale weren't there for a long time. And there was a lot of data as to whether consumers would pay a premium for sustainable products or whatever. But they are, by and large, more and more there now. And so you really can compete. It will be apples to apples. But then you have this higher order impact. So let's take Nike and Adidas.
Yeah.
Nike has been deeply committed, amongst other issues, to social justice. Colin Kaepernick, Serena Williams, all of these examples they've used. And, that blew up in the media, over the last couple of years, and has been incredibly timely, especially through the Black Lives Matter. So they've really been about racial equality and social justice. And they've given their athletes a platform. At the same time, Adidas or Adidas has been deeply committed to sustainability, and they've really built their whole brand identity around this creators platform. I actually went over to and saw Adidas HQ last year, and went over to Nuremberg, and you walk into their place in Germany, and it's like a temple, these amazing buildings that are sort of like temples to creators. And what have they done? They've done the partnership with Parley for the oceans, taking ocean plastic out and making shoes out of that. It blew up and drove them so much earned media. More recently, they've done a partnership with Allbirds, an otherwise competitor shoe, and they've done a partnership to develop the world's most carbon neutral shoes. So they've redefined competition. So here you see two sports brands literally duking it out, one on the strength of social justice, among other issues, one on the strength of sustainability. And in both cases, as somebody looks to buy a pair of trainers or sneakers, that will either win the day for them, or it might take them across to another brand. But they are relevant to the world in which people live. And that's why both of these parties are doing it.
So is that the message then to a lot of these, I don't know if they're business owners, if they're students at the MBA, at the Harvard School, what exactly are you teaching these students, and how do you see the form of education consumption changing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, education consumption now is tough. I mean, to oversimplify, everyone's, snacking on content. We've all got a very short attention span, and we've got to take things down. The way I put it is this. We used to rebuild our habits in life around the delivery format of education. So we'd sit down and watch a 3-hour movie, or we would do this or do that. Now we're multitasking while we're watching a movie. People are delivering content in 8-second, 10-second bites and so on. Podcasts are being delivered in ways that we can listen to them on the commute to work when we were driving to work. So instead of us being built around the education is being rebuilt or redesigned or re-engineered around our lifestyles. Mm-hmm. And that increases the challenge for educators, because content, information, courseware wasn't fragmented or fractured, but to the same degree, and it makes it harder for them to get out there. At the same time, the mind is very plastic, and as I understand it, over the last decade or so, you've really seen young people's minds, their brains develop differently based on the way that they consume content and knowledge and so on. So it's actually a fool's errand to try and convince these younger minds to go back to the way things were, because they think and experience and consume content in very different ways to when I was a young whippersnapper. So, we've got to be, most of us and many companies don't live in the world we are in. They are living in a world 10, 20, 30 years ago, many of them. And if you really want to kind of resonate and educate in a way that's going to scale, you actually have to look clear-eyed at the reality of the world we live in and create content to that end.
Do you think something's going to replace the textbook? I mean, for instance, it's the distribution game. If I can make a piece of content that every single educational institution around the world can receive for a better price, again, and comparable, that's more purpose driven, say they're about sustainable businesses versus regular or just traditional business, that's more just better, it's more entertaining, let's just say. Do you think that could have an impact on education? And why do you think it's so hard to integrate new educational materials into the classroom?
Well, it's very personal, because I got a 21 and an 18-year-old daughter, so I'm living this reality. And do I think the textbook will be replaced? Well, I think the term will stay. It'll just be a series of text messages, not actually a literal textbook. But all of that is to say, the number one sport today amongst young people who are going to university or school is to see what sort of video they can create and then use as their background in Zoom, so that their teacher thinks they're actually there while they're actually asleep somewhere else or out with their friends. I mean, and these poor teachers, I mean, they are doing everything they can, despite their own challenges, to keep these kids compelled at arm's length when no one wants to sit and stare at a screen all day, just in a Zoom experience. So they're struggling. I mean, in a sense, education right now is set up for failure, because in a normal world where we didn't have COVID going on, no one would design it this way, where you sit on your own in a room and stare at a screen with only kind of very limited two-way interaction for hours on end. It just doesn't make sense. You look at the alternative, particularly in Northern European countries, where they've got project-based learning, they've got 4 or 5 hour school days, and their charts are off their schools are off the charts. If you actually look at the data that comes out each year, it's the best performing populations around the world of kids in terms of education. They're all of these countries with programs that are very dissimilar to what you see here in the United States. It's not, working your butt off all day long and now even staring at screens. It's much more sort of, outdoors and project-based learning, and they nurture the creativity inside the individual child instead of shoving the child into the education sausage machine. So all of that is to say, COVID has complicated an already difficult problem. And I think the opportunity is, while still doing, honoring the content you're trying to provide, is to build your curriculum, build your delivery formats, build your progress reports and how you recognize success and so on around the way that people are living today. And they're consuming, and if that content is not presented in a way that it's easy, seamless, instantaneous, and for the right duration for them to consume, why on earth would they adopt it? And why would they stay even if they tried once? So I think we have to rebuild education around the individual instead of the other way around.
So as a parent that has 2 daughters going to university right now, what do you hope they take away with their experience? What is missing, and what are your hopes for them, I guess? We
had a long, hard discussion. My wife was a high school teacher. Both my daughters, my youngest had just got into university and a great scholarship and things like that. And we have decided, we pulled them both out of study this year, and they are on a plane to Australia in a few weeks for an indefinite one-way trip on their own.
Oh, wow.
And for the School of Life, because by their own admission and in terms of our opinion, the education experience is very compromised right now. And not only is that difficult to endure anyway, but both my daughters wanted that authentic university experience, with the busy campus, with the dorm rooms, with all the things that make that period of life so special. To sit 6 feet away in the classroom and so on. And this is a personal decision, and there's no sense of criticism of anyone who has their kid going to school right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, these are just personal choices. It just happened to be appropriate to a gap year for my kids. But it does point back to your point about what do we do right now? It's really, really tough already. Not only are schools sending their kids home because, COVID and so on, but there's a lot of people struggling. From what I hear of my daughter's friends, they're sitting in their apartments adjacent to the university, sitting on Zoom all day. That's hard.
Yep.
That's really hard.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people right now that are asking themselves, what is the point of this right now? Why am I paying a full tuition to have my son or daughter learn over a Zoom call where the professors don't want to be, the other students don't want to be, and you can't interact with the students? Now, at a public school, you're in a lecture of 300 plus kids, but at a private school, you get to know your teacher. You have a one-on-one relationship with them. There's a lot of people asking themselves right now, education has to change. What's going to happen to it? Your thoughts on the future of education reform?
The future of education is a tough one for 2 reasons. I don't necessarily think we're teaching kids the right things. To give our kids a better future, we've got to start teaching them what it's going to take to make that future possible. And in a lot of cases, there is very limited awareness or priority given to the issues that they're going to spend the rest of their lives living in or solving for, climate and otherwise. And there are some platforms out there. For example, there's a company called Participate Learning, which actually, it's a global learning platform, and it brings in education about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and all these issues like climate into the classroom for kids. So that's one issue. I think, if we really want to set them up for success in this world, we can't just be teaching them stuff that made sense back in the 1980s. It just doesn't make sense. There's just a dissonance there. At the same time, if you want to then, the second thing is, I think there are a lot of incredible thought leaders and commentators around what the nature of education should look like. And Sir Ken Robinson, who tragically or sadly passed only a few weeks ago, was an enormous thought leader and educator, really, led the dialogue around the traditional education system, crushing the creativity out of children. And so I think, it's a very complicated issues between unions and resources and power and politics and all of these different things. But there's a lot of ways that education should change outright to best serve the kids, at the same time as they also need to learn new things to help them solve for the future that rapidly is coming towards them.
You mentioned the school of life. Maybe to me, that would be understanding different cultures, traveling abroad and getting out of your comfort zone, finding out who you are. Something that, classroom really can't teach it, but it might not be for that experience. Maybe colleges, going it somewhere else. How important is it to you that people, coming from Australia, that people from different cultures get to experience a different sense of way?
It's really interesting. I got to say this. I'm a US citizen. I've been here over 20 years. My mother was a Hungarian refugee from the Hungarian Revolution. My wife is Egyptian, and her parents escaped Egypt in 1967 and came to Australia. Like a lot of people in Australia, you escape something or they threw you aside somewhere else.
Right.
And then we all shag each other furiously and then go out into the world and see what we can do.
Right.
And so I've been lucky enough to spend time in Japan and then France for a significant period of time, and then 5 years in London, and then 5 years in Oregon, or 4 years in Oregon, and now 20 years in LA. And my wife being Egyptian, we've had a lot of time in the Middle East. And, you're lucky enough to get this sort of multifaceted experience of what the human family looks like in different versions of life. And there is, to some extent, and partly perhaps it's a function of being, the leading nation in the world, there is an insularity that comes with that, because everybody around the world, to differing degrees, right or wrong at different times, looks towards the United States aspirationally. They're like, wow, look at what you're doing there. You are shaping culture around the world. You are leading industries. You are et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in my opinion, not knowing anything different, because I grew up in a house with different languages and how could you do anything but? And I think the greatest education for any young mind is to be forced to interact with different ideas, but also different versions of life, to truly see what poverty looks like on a daily basis. One of the gifts of COVID that I think many parents or families have taken away is a lesson that you also get from traveling around, which is we've been reminded of the power and priority we should give to the simple things. Time with family, like so much time you have conversations you wouldn't otherwise have, cooking together, playing games, the simple things like the ability to go outside and look at a sunrise, or to observe flowers in the garden, or to stop running around and walk around your neighborhood at night like so many other people, and to go, wow, I didn't look at all of this. This is look at that tree over there, or this or that. It's given us the opportunity to slow down so we could see what's right in front of us every day. And so I think going around the world, you'll see these fundamentals of family and food and fun together that we've forgotten, because I look back at my life prior to COVID like a madman, jumping around, doing this, calls, this and that. And I'm really going to try and be intentional about moderating that moving forward. And I do think travel around the world really makes you appreciate that.
I've heard COVID is a silver lining about a dozen times in this past week or two, from friends, from family members. Hell, I've even picked up saying it as well. I mean, I think people, when they started out staying inside, it wasn't as fun, but now people are realizing, just like you said, family's important. It's the little things that matter. Now, Simon, I went home about 2 weeks ago. And one of my favorite things about going back home to Portland, Oregon, is when you get off the airplane, you take a deep breath of that Oregon oxygen, and it just fills your lungs, and you go, I'm back. You don't get that in Tucson, Arizona, where I went to college. You don't get that really in San Diego. When I left, however, Simon, it was quite the contrary, quite the opposite. There were fires that were going on. The experience I had of my home state, of being an outdoor enthusiast, being able to observe nature in clear days and breathe in this oxygen was taken away from us. The sun was blocked out. It was the index of air quality was 500. I got 4 cancellations on my flight because the plane couldn't operate, or the air traffic control safety had no visibility. It was that bad. So I guess the example I'm trying to make is this, in terms of being aware of environmental destruction, being aware of poverty, how many more experiences do we have to observe for us to come to a realization that we're all in this together, and that we need to work together?
COVID-19 is a fire drill. We have all been forced to reprioritize what we do, to change, to drop our regular lives, and to pay daily attention to the conditions we've created together. And here's the funny thing about it all. If we don't listen to a wake-up call as loud as this, then we, to some degree, deserve what we get. Because if you think about it, even above and beyond the world wars, there's never been a moment where there's been a crisis of the same degree that the entire world has experienced at once, that cost trillions of dollars, shut down millions of businesses, put people home out of work, kids out of school. And it was something larger than ourselves. If you would argue that, the world wars and so on were, to a degree, a creation of humanity. We went head to head for whatever the reasons, terrible reasons. So if we don't listen to that, then we're kind of ticking the box of like, do you want to survive, yes or no, as a species? Because the reality is this: COVID doesn't care. Climate doesn't care. I mean, they don't really care where you went to school, what your job title is, what type of car you drive, or why you made whatever choice you made that compounded the problem. So I look at it now and say, this is giving us a pause to reset our perspective, or to look in a new way, because we've spent the last several decades looking but not seeing what's going on. We've been listening but not hearing the damage we're doing. And this pause is forcing us to literally stay at home, do nothing, shut down, and really think through on a daily basis, on a private emotional level, a life or death scenario. And the connective tissue between each other and the planet has been thrown into stark relief. And here's the thing that I find so not amusing, just strange about it all. This presumption that we could somehow just take care of ourselves, profit for profit's sake, me first mentality, all of that, presumes that somehow we can do something and it won't have a knock-on effect. We're just going to kind of engorge ourselves and the consequences won't matter. But the reality is, whether we are trying to look after ourselves or look after others, we're still connected. So as you say, we are in this together, whether we're taking care of ourselves at the cost of everybody else, or thinking and behaving in a way that's actually going to serve everybody else and then ultimately ourselves. We can't deny our connectedness to each other and the planet. So the choice we're facing is very simple. Do we want to put ourselves out of business, or do we want to, be on the right side of history and nature, because nature doesn't care, and nature is regenerative and fundamentally abundant, and it can provide for all these things we need, but not if we line our own pockets at the sake of everybody else. So we are in this together. And what I kind of object to most of late is just the false conceit that we have, that we can somehow even live in a way that's profit for profit's sake, or just live in a me first kind of way, because we're just denying the fundamental truth that every action we take individually and collectively has an impact on others and on the planet. And we're now reaching that threshold moment where we've got to choose. Because nature will win. Nature will win. The planet will be fine without us.
Yes.
Nature will win. So do we want to be on the side of nature or not?
Exactly. We can't deny it. We essentially are dead to an earth that is alive.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is very sad. And I am the one to say, there aren't any excuses anymore. You have, just like we've talked about on the show, you have to go out and try extra hard to find more female guests that come on the show, right? You have to go out and find those suppliers that are fair trade, that are regenerative agriculture, that are organic farmers. You have to take the extra step in order to make this change. There aren't any more excuses anymore. And I had an interesting conversation today with our founder. He was saying the difference between success and significance. We need to change this idea of success. It's not maximizing shareholder value. It's being significant in the world. What does that mean to you? What are your thoughts on success versus significance?
There's a couple of thoughts, and I touched on one thought on a previous show we did, which is the idea of fulfillment. And it's this core idea that I've learned over my journey of the last 20 or 30 years as an Aussie schlepping his butt all around the world, trying to see if there's something else going on. I need to discover the simple stuff that matters most. But, fulfillment is an inside-out job. We think that if you get awards or recognition or money or a job or a fancy car, that's going to fill you up. But it doesn't. You fill yourself up by what you give to others. So this service mentality is actually one of the great secrets that most people don't come to. But I think this younger generation is more predisposed. Why? Because the conditions in which they find themselves are so acute and drastic that they're just showing up that way, and they are innately empathetic, and they want to play a meaningful role. And then, significance is an interesting word. I think we all have the opportunity. How would I put it? When I look, we could learn a lot from Indigenous people around the world. And I say for this reason, I had a conversation with a wonderful author and change agent, Lynn Twist, who wrote this book called The Soul of Money, and she runs the Pachamama Alliance, which takes CEOs to the headwaters in the Amazon, and it literally transforms how they see the world, and then they change their companies. She's an incredible inspiration. And one of the things she was sharing was, amongst Indigenous nations, whether you're talking about Eskimos, Native Americans, Aboriginals in Australia, not to oversimplify, but there's a common theme that it's not about having as much as you can have, it's about sufficiency. And someone who takes more than they need is actually considered crazy, as in mentally unwell, because it competes with the well-being of the whole. It robs the entire ecosystem of its ability to kind of sustain growth and regenerate life, and therefore provide for the whole community. So effectively, in terms of our relationship with nature, to extrapolate from that, we are all insane the way that we're living our lives. We are literally choking the oceans, polluting the air, killing the soil on which we all depend. So, it's a very different idea. So coming back to your point about significance, I think significance is not about importance. It's not about wealth. It's not about success. Significance is about being very sober in terms of the role that you want to play in life. And as an extension of that, adopting a servant leader mentality where you want to lead, but you want to be of service to others. And then by recognizing that the well-being of the whole is the fastest and smartest way to secure the well-being of the individual parts, including yourself. And so, I say that on the strength of starting We First and then working with big brands to help them make a difference, because they were the biggest levers that I thought about that I could pull, much bigger than I could ever do on my own if I was working on a nonprofit or something like that. Work with these big companies and social enterprise, make a difference. So my hope for significance in terms of my time is to help as many of us and leverage the biggest levers to make a difference in a way that contributes to others. And I think that's where significance is found. And if you're successful at doing that, then you have significance.
I've heard it so many times, whether it's from Jay Shetty, a monk, who says the most fulfilled people in this world are monks who practice on their minds. Whether it's from Akon, a multi-millionaire who says, you have all this millions and then what? You can't leave with it. There's no purpose behind it. There's no fulfillment. That's why he's going out and doing so many philanthropic things or building an eco city powered entirely by solar energy. How does one practice fulfillment? How does one practice significance? How does one practice and strengthen the mind if you're saying fulfillment is an inside out job?
It's interesting. It's the right question, but the answer is sort of a little counterintuitive in the sense that it's not something that we have to do that's different to what we've done. but rather it's something we have to remember what we forgot.
Mm.
I believe fundamental to human nature, when we come into this world and you see it in children, we are naturally empathetic, we are loving, we are nurturing, we care for each other, we have a visceral response to the natural environment. And somehow that gets educated and taught out of us, explicitly or implicitly, throughout our lives. And so in a similar, well, not a hugely dissimilar way to what COVID has done, which has forced us to pause and reassess things, we need to recalibrate who we are, or kind of strip away all of these outside influences that are telling us who to be, and to recognize inside who you are. For example, for a long time I was an ad guy traveling around, and I was trying to be a cool or successful ad guy, but it never gelled with me. At the end of the day, I'm a family guy who gets really affected when I see other people suffer. I'm just like, empathetically, I can't, it doesn't sit with me. I can't just dismiss it. I can't look away. And when you make a commitment where you find alignment between who you are and what you do on a daily basis, that's when you find fulfillment. And in my experience, that alignment is most readily achieved and has the greatest degree of significance in your life when you're being of service to others. And the tool of your trade could be a business, it could be a product innovation, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. But when you shift your thinking from self-aggrandizement or winning or getting ahead of the other, or this whole winner-takes-all mentality, and you really say, how can I be of greater service to everyone who touches my company, whether it's the suppliers, employees, and so on, everything changes. And I think what it taps into is our innate disposition to be connected to each other, to be connected to the planet. And, I guess to oversimplify, there's a distinction between selfishness and healthy self-interest. It is very healthy for human beings to be self-interested. They need to look after themselves, their families, and so on. But when it crosses over into selfishness, where your success or whatever comes at the cost of somebody else, that's when it gets problematic.
Simon, next month we talk, there will be an election that will have had taken place. Now, I don't want your political opinion and all. This is not a political show. However, I do want what you hope for the world, what will happen. Regardless of who wins, what is a reaction or a type of understanding you would like from the world?
Yeah, I think politics aside, it's very difficult to do what we're going to need to do for humanity and the planet when we're so polarized. And so whatever the result, I want it to be unifying. My great hope would be something that brings people together. Why? I think at the end of the day, the future is a story we write every day. We wake up each day, and by our thoughts, our actions, our choices, we're literally crafting the future. We're building it brick by brick each day through our collective actions. And to that end, for a long time, humanity is like one big family sitting around a campfire telling stories. We've come together and said, oh, let's go to the moon, or let's peaceful resistance, or the civil rights movement, whatever it might be. Right now, I feel like we've broken off into several different camps, and they each have their core groups sitting around a campfire, but we're not sharing the same stories. And those stories aren't unifying for everyone. And so I don't think that we can move forward to the degree or at the pace we need until we're aligned around a shared story. And that story needs to be focused on how we nurture our planet to better everyone's future. And so my great hope would be that this would be the final chapter, the coda, the curtains closing on rising division, not just here in the United States, but around the world, and a recognition that we are one human family, all perched on this very precious blue orb that is hurtling through space. And our time here and the time of our kids and their kids is very, very insignificant. But our collective actions while we're here are hugely significant in terms of the quality of life that everyone will enjoy.
I love it. Well, Simon, I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about in a month. Thanks again for coming back on the podcast.
You're welcome.
I would just say for anyone out there who is afraid to have a heated exchange, or if you do have a heated exchange, always wrap up with the question of what can we agree upon? Because there's always something in the middle. So just want to say that, and those will be my last words today. Any last words from you, Simon, on the third episode?
all I would share is that, we're lucky enough in our work at WeFirst to talk to lots of folks who are doing the type of work that we're talking about, small companies, large companies. And I had this podcast at leadwithwe.com, leadwithwe.com. And you check it out and you'll hear from the CEOs and presidents and SVPs of some of the most purposeful companies out there. And the only reason we do these things is so that more people can benefit from their hard-won lessons. So if that's useful to you, love you to check it out and so on. That'd be great. Rate, review, subscribe, do all those things that people do on those things.
Help Simon out, folks. Leadwithwe.com. Go on there, hit the subscribe, scroll all the way down to the bottom. Keep scrolling and leave a review from Mr. Mainwaring here. Simon, for the third episode of the Keep It Real series, just want to appreciate you coming back on the show. We'll see you next month. And always, Simon, keep it real.
Thanks, Kevin. A pleasure as always.